Next, I just want to take a very quick look at the Unity editor here. And as we go through making our game, we're going to get more and more familiar with all the functions of it. And at first it might seem like there's a lot of buttons and toggles and whatever else, but don't be overwhelmed. All of it is fairly logical, and we're going to cover quite a bit of it throughout the course. Now, when I first started using Unity, I had a lot of problems just navigating through the main scene window here. When you do this, make sure you have a good mouse. It helps that you have a 3-button mouse, and the middle button should be a scroll button. So if you use the scroll, you can see I can zoom in and out. If you hold down the right mouse button, you can look around the scene. We can zoom in, look around. And we use the left mouse button to click on things. We also use the left mouse button to move objects around the scene. So we'll get into that in a little bit later part. So Unity comes with 2 main windows that you're going to be using a lot. That's the scene window and the game view. Now the scene window is the editor, so to speak, and you can see all the little details, where the game view is what your game is going to see. And in this case, it's what the main camera sees here. So if we go into the scene view and click on the main camera, we can see what it's being seen here. And we're going to talk about cameras a little bit later. The only other thing that comes into the scene view by default is the directional light. And this just shines some light onto the scene so that we have something to see with. Now I have the asset store open. I can go ahead and just close this tab. For some reason I have an animator tab open. I can go ahead and close that one. We don't need it. Over on the side we have the inspector. The inspector just gives us the general information of whatever we're clicking on. So this is context dependent. Meaning if we're clicking on a cube, it's going to tell us about the cube. If we're clicking on a light, it's going to tell us about the light. So we're going to spend a lot of time over here in the inspector changing all of these things. Now we also have the lighting tab open by default, and we're going to cover this in the lighting section. So for now you just want to keep everything by default. Again, my services tab seems to pop open. I'm going to close this. But what the services tab is good for is it's going to allow you to do things like add advertising to your game or use analytics or other things like that, but we're not going to cover that in this tutorial. Now along at the bottom we've already looked at the project setting here. The project is basically like a file browser, and it can show all the things that we've imported, and we're going to use these to drag and drop them on the screen. We can also use these favorites to see all of the materials we have, all of the models, all of the prefabs, and all the scripts, and we'll go over that as well as we get into things deeper. Then we have the console, like we talked about, which is good for debugging the game. And now we have our Playmaker tab down here as well. So you can move and dock these wherever you want, although I do suggest you follow this basic setup just for the beginning, and then once you get more comfortable, you can change to different ways of using this. Now, one last thing that will probably come up quite often is the ability to unlock or lock things. And this is important because we need to use it often, but almost every panel has the ability to be locked. So for example, we have the main camera, and if we go over to the inspector, we can see the main camera's properties, and then we choose directional light, changes back and forth. Now, sometimes we want to lock it here, so we click on directional light, go over to this tiny little lock, click the lock, and now when we choose main camera or other things, the inspector panel stays where it is, so we don't accidentally navigate away. When we're done, we can just click unlock, and then we can navigate away. Another thing is in the assets here, if we have a whole bunch of assets, we can change the way that they display by grabbing at the very bottom this resize bar, and as you can see, it can resize the folders. I like to keep mine nice and large because as we get farther in and we start using these models from our scene, it's easier to see them here if they're large. So if it's small, You can't see them, you just get names. So I like it as big as possible so I can see these for when I'm using them in my game. Okay, so let's go to the next video here and get started on whiteboxing and get familiar with using primitive shapes.